There are wounds that time does not touch. They don't bleed or show. They simply live quietly beneath the ribs, beating with the same rhythm as the heart they inhabit. Her pain was like that, not sharp anymore, not loud, just constant. A soft, familiar ache she had learned to carry like a shadow. Sometimes she forgot it was there until a song played on the radio, or she smelled his old cologne on a passing stranger, and suddenly the ache woke up again. She didn't speak of it. There was no one left to tell, and what would she say? That her heart still hurt for things that had happened decades ago, for love lost, for words never spoken, for the years that moved too fast? No. She simply smiled when people asked how she was. "It's just age," she'd say. But she knew better. It wasn't her body that was tired. It was her heart, and it had been waiting a long time to be healed. People often speak of heartbreak as a single moment, a loss, a goodbye, an ending. But hers hadn't come that way. Her heart had broken slowly, like glass cracking under pressure, so softly she hadn't noticed until the light inside her began to dim. A friend who stopped calling, a letter that never came, children too busy to visit. The empty chair across from hers at dinner. Each small thing took something from her, and she gave it willingly, until one day there was little left to give. She still smiled when she needed to, still went to church, still prayed before bed, but the prayers had grown shorter, like whispers that didn't expect to be heard. Sometimes she touched her chest without meaning to, right over her heart, as if checking whether it still worked. And deep inside, she thought, maybe some things are too broken for God to fix. But heaven had other plans. Her days were filled with echoes, laughter that belonged to another time, faces that lived only in photographs, the scent of old letters, the sound of his name when someone else spoke it by accident, memories used to bring her comfort. Now they only reminded her of everything she had lost. She would sit on the edge of her bed, hands clasped, and say quietly, "Lord, why does remembering hurt so much?" There was no anger in her question, just a longing to understand why love could wound so deeply, and why the ache refused to fade. Some nights she prayed to forget, to stop dreaming of things that would never return, but forgetting never came, because love, once planted by God himself, doesn't die. It waits, even when buried under grief, for the touch that will make it bloom again. And that touch was closer than she thought. It was late, the kind of late when the world feels empty. No cars, no voices, only the ticking of the clock on her nightstand. She lay there, her hand resting gently over her chest. She could feel her heart still beating, but it felt mechanical, as if it had forgotten what it was beating for. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't think my heart works anymore." Her words hung in the darkness, unanswered. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the feeling of love, not the idea of it, but the warmth, the safety, the pulse that once made life sweet. But it was gone, lost in the noise of years. Maybe hearts don't break, she thought. Maybe they just fade. And with that, she let sleep come, not knowing that heaven was already stirring, that before the next dawn the healer of hearts would begin his work. That night her prayer was simple, barely more than a thought, whispered into the quiet air, a last plea from a tired soul. "Lord, if you can fix hearts, start with mine." She didn't expect an answer, didn't expect a miracle. She had prayed too many times before. Her words felt like echoes now. But she said them anyway, the way someone says goodbye to something they know they'll never see again. A soft surrender, an offering of the heart she had been hiding away for years. "Lord, if you can fix hearts." Her voice trailed off into the night and she waited, but nothing happened, or so she thought. In the silence, the one who had been waiting for her to ask was already moving toward her, not with a rush, but with a quiet, deliberate step. Her house had become a reflection of her heart. Once filled with laughter, with the sounds of life, it was now quiet. The walls were decorated with memories, yet the rooms felt hollow, like an old house waiting to be sold. The silence had become thick, a presence in itself, and it echoed in every corner. Even her faith seemed distant, like a candle whose flame had long since flickered out. She had prayed the same prayers so many times, but they seemed to fade into the same empty space, and yet, somewhere in the distance, a small spark remained, an ember that refused to die. It wasn't faith as she had known it. It was barely a whisper, but it was enough for Jesus to see. He knew that even in her emptiness, she was still waiting, and that was all he needed. It wasn't the silence that hurt. It was the emptiness it carried. She would walk through the house, pausing at the old rocking chair, the empty table, the photos of people who no longer came. And in those moments, she could almost hear it. The soft echo of loneliness, a sound that hummed through the walls, whispering that there was no one left to share her world with. Even the walls seemed to breathe with her sadness. And in her quiet heart, she thought, "Is this what it's all become?" But Jesus had never forgotten the sound of loneliness. And that night, in the place where silence had become the loudest, he would speak again, not to fill the emptiness with noise, but with his presence. There comes a moment when the weight of trying to hold everything together becomes too much. The constant struggle to make sense of it all, to find meaning in the empty spaces, begins to wear down even the strongest will. She had tried to fix herself for years, patching up the cracks, gluing the broken pieces back together. But the pieces didn't fit. One night, she sank to her knees beside the bed, not to ask for help, but to surrender. "I can't do this anymore, Lord," she whispered. "Do whatever you want with me. I've nothing left to give." And in that moment, when her heart was completely emptied of expectation, he came. Not with answers, but with presence, not with promises of healing, but with the assurance that he was there, the one thing she needed more than anything else. And though she didn't yet know it, this surrender was the moment her heart began to heal. She stayed kneeling for a while after the prayer ended, hands resting on her lap, eyes closed. The silence was deep, but it wasn't empty anymore. Then, almost imperceptibly, something changed. The air in the room felt different, not colder or warmer, but alive. A soft stillness settled over her shoulders, like the feeling of being covered by a blanket you didn't know you needed. Her breath slowed. Her tears stopped, not from effort, but because peace had taken their place. It wasn't a vision, it wasn't imagination, it was presence. There, in that quiet room, without light or sound, Jesus had entered. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. His nearness was the language of healing, the kind that doesn't come from words but from being known. And for the first time in a long time, her broken heart rested, not because it was fixed, but because it was held. Healing rarely arrives with noise. It comes quietly, like dawn spreading across a window pane while the world still sleeps. That's how it began for her. A stirring, faint but real, as if something fragile inside her had remembered how to breathe. There were no flashes of light, no visions of angels, just the slow return of peace, the kind she thought had long abandoned her. She felt a warmth in her chest, soft and steady, as though someone had placed a hand there, not to take away her pain, but to awaken life beneath it. Tears came again, but these were different. They didn't sting, they healed. And in that sacred stillness, she heard the faintest whisper, not with her ears, but inside her heart. "I am here. And I never left." That was all it took. One sentence, and the cracks began to close. It felt like her soul had become a tapestry, and gentle hands were moving across it, weaving, stitching, restoring what had been torn. Every regret, every sorrow, every hidden wound she had carried for years seemed to soften under that unseen touch. She didn't understand how healing worked. She only knew that the heaviness she'd lived with for so long was beginning to lift thread by thread. At times, she felt warmth rise up her chest. Not pain, not memory, but release. It was as though Jesus was whispering into every broken part, "This too is mine. I can make it whole." Her breathing deepened, her shoulders relaxed, and where there had been a void, now there was presence, gentle, constant, alive. She had once believed her heart too shattered for mending. But the healer works not with what is new, but with what remains. And that night, he was making something eternal out of her fragments. When morning came, she noticed it first in her breathing. It was deeper, freer. No tightness, no heaviness, only rhythm. She sat up slowly, hand resting over her heart. It beat steadily beneath her palm, not fast, not weak, but full, as though each thump carried peace instead of pain. It wasn't the heart of a younger woman. It was better. It was a heart touched by mercy. She smiled softly, realizing she hadn't woken with dread. The ache was still there, but it no longer ruled her. It had been quieted, like a storm that had spent its last strength. Her eyes filled with tears again, not sorrow now, but gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "not for taking the pain away, but for teaching my heart to live with it in peace." And somewhere unseen, Jesus smiled, because restoration is not about erasing what was broken, but about making it whole again. The first time it happened, she was pouring tea. The morning light had fallen just right across the table, and a small bird landed on the windowsill, its feathers trembling in the wind. It sang, just once, a short, bright note, and before she knew it, she smiled. Not because anything extraordinary had occurred, but because something ordinary finally felt beautiful again. She paused, hands still holding the cup, and realized she hadn't smiled like that in years. Not politely. Not for others, but from the quiet place inside her where gratitude now lived. It wasn't happiness as the world understands it. It was gentler, steadier, a joy without reason, the kind that needs no proof. She looked up and whispered, "I thought I'd forgotten how to feel this." And deep within her spirit came an echo, warm and patient. "You hadn't forgotten. I just kept it safe for you." That was how it began, the return of joy, as soft and sure as morning light through lace curtains. Love came back slowly, not as passion or excitement, but as tenderness, quiet and constant. She began to care again, for the flowers she had stopped watering, for the old cat that followed her everywhere, for the faces in the photographs she once couldn't bear to look at. But most of all, she began to love people again, not in the way of longing, but in the way of giving. Each small kindness, a smile, a gentle word, a prayer, became an offering, a way to pour out the peace she had been given. There was no bitterness left in her. Even the memories that once made her heart ache now felt wrapped in light. She would look at them, sigh softly and say, "Thank you, Lord, and for every piece of what made me who I am." And that's what healing had done. It hadn't erased her past. It had sanctified it. Her heart, once fractured, now held more love than it ever had before, because it had been touched by the hands of Jesus. They began to notice the change before she did. The woman next door, the postman, the children who played by her gate, they all said the same thing. "Your house feels peaceful." She didn't plan it, didn't even try. But wherever she went, the peace that had filled her heart seemed to follow. She would listen when people spoke, really listen, and when they left they always felt lighter. Her eyes, once dimmed by grief, now carried warmth. Her words, once few and weary, now carried life. She had become what Jesus had made of her, a vessel of restoration. And sometimes, late in the evening, as she prayed for those who came to her, she would smile and say softly, "Lord, you didn't just fix my heart. You made it a home for others to rest in." And he would answer, in that quiet way he always did, "I know." Her prayers had changed. They were no longer requests, but conversations of gratitude. No long lists, no urgent pleas, just simple words spoken with a trembling voice. "Thank you for staying when I had nothing to offer. Thank you for mending what I thought was gone. Thank you for not letting me go." Each thank you seemed to echo into eternity, as though heaven itself rejoiced to hear them. Her days were still simple, the same tea, the same chair, the same house, but everything inside those moments now glowed with meaning. Even silence had become worship. Even loneliness felt inhabited by presence. And she often thought, Maybe this is what restoration truly means, to find beauty again in what never changed. Because I did, and she did, completely, quietly, eternally. There were still quiet mornings when sadness brushed her heart, but it no longer stayed. It came softly, like an old friend stopping by to say goodbye, and then it left, leaving peace in its place. She didn't expect joy every day, nor did she demand that everything make sense. She had learned something far deeper, that peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence of Christ within it. When she looked in the mirror now, she saw the same lines, the same grey hair, but behind them something had changed. Her eyes no longer looked tired, they looked kind. And she thought, this is what healing looks like, not youth, but rest. The heart that once feared every tomorrow now faced each one with calm. Whatever came, light or shadow, she was ready, because she knew she would never face it alone again. Pain didn't vanish from her life. It still visited, as all pain does. A memory here, an ache there, reminders of the world's imperfection. But she was different now. The same things that used to shatter her now met something unshakable inside. Her heart had been reforged in love, stronger not because it no longer broke, but because it had learned how to heal. When grief came, she no longer fought it. She let it pass through her, and when it did, it left light behind. She prayed softly each time, "Lord, thank you for teaching me that even pain has a purpose." And he would remind her gently, "A heart touched by me never breaks the same way twice, because every crack now shines with grace." She carried those words like treasure. Her heart, once fragile, was now the dwelling place of strength itself. The years passed quietly, and her steps grew slower, her hands softer, her voice a little more fragile. But her peace only deepened. She often sat by her window, watching the sunset paint the sky with gold, and whispered, "I've had enough light for one life." Her children noticed the glow in her, not of youth, but of eternity. When she felt her strength finally leaving, she didn't resist. She smiled, closed her eyes, and whispered one last prayer. "Lord, thank you for giving my heart back to me." And in that same stillness where he had once entered her pain, he came again, not as visitor, but as the one who had been waiting to take her home.